It is the beginning of August, so that can only mean one thing, wrap-up time. Today, I bring to you the books I read in July. Hello everyone, it is Samantha and I hope you guys are having a lovely day today. I'm here today to talk about all of the books that I read in July, which was five. I DNF'd one halfway through, and then I almost read one. I got halfway through one before the end of the month, so not a bad reading month at all. As always, I like to start my wrap-ups out with some statistics from my reading month, so without further ado, let us jump into these numbers. So in the month of July, I read a total of 2,265 pages, which averages to about 73 pages a day. 66% of the books that I read were fantasy, 16% were science fiction, and the remaining 16 were historical fiction. In terms of book format, 66% were trade paperback, the rest were all hardcovers. In terms of book length, 33% were between 300 and 400 pages, 33% were between 400 and 500 pages, 16% were between 500 and 600 pages, and the remaining 16% was between 100 and 200 pages. So a pretty good mix of book size. In terms of the years in which the books that I read were published, the vast majority were from 2018, a couple are from 2017, and one book was from the 1970s. In terms of book status, so where I acquired the books that I read, 50% were ARCs from publishers, 33% I purchased, and 16% were gifts. And finally, in terms of star ratings, 50% of the books that I read were 4 stars, 16% were 3.5 stars, 16% was 3 stars, and the remaining 16% were 0 stars. That would be the one DNF I had. That's basically all of my statistics that I have for you guys for the month of July. And now we're going to get to the important part of this video, and that is what books did I actually read, and what did I think of them? The first book that I read and completed in July was A Crucible of Souls by Mitchell Hogan. This is the first book in the Sorcery Ascendant Sequence fantasy series. It is a debut novel by the author Mitchell Hogan, and it follows our main protagonist of Calden, who was basically orphaned and was raised in this monastery. It's a monastic school, basically, except for it's a place where all of the rich people send their children to be, schooled in the arts of sorcery, as well as swordplay, and, your more traditional subjects such as history and whatnot. And he is basically here at the whim of the monks, basically being raised among the nobility, so he never really fits in. People kind of disdain him. And an unfortunate event in which he ended up attacking a son of a noble family sees him exiled from the island that this monastery is on to the mainland, where he basically has to make a name for himself. So he ends up at the city he's never been in before, and he has to kind of find his way. He ends up finding his place among the Sorcerers Guild, and it was when he joins the Sorcerers Guild that he kind of learns there's a lot more going on in the world of sorcery as well as in this city. There's a lot of political machinations occurring, and he doesn't quite know what's going on and how he fits into them. And soon all hell breaks loose, and that's kind of when our story really takes off. Overall, I enjoyed the story. I rated it 3 stars primarily because while I enjoyed the story and felt it was original, I had a hard time with his writing. It was definitely a first novel. The pacing was terrible for the first chunk of the book. And the writing itself just felt very kind of bland, I guess I would say. It didn't feel very natural. It felt a little bit forced. So that's kind of what ended up leading to my 3-star rating. I did enjoy the story enough that I got book 2. I want to see if book 2 kind of improves upon some of the issues I had in book 1. I haven't read it yet. Hopefully I will in the next month or so. So overall, as I said, I rated this book 3 stars. I gave the plot 4 stars. I gave the writing 2 stars. I gave the world building 2.5 stars. There really was not a whole lot of world building in this book, so you kind of felt like you were a little bit in the dark. I gave the characters 3 out of 5 stars. I liked the characters themselves and the roles they were meant to play, but the way that he drew them and described them and had them act just felt very one-dimensional. So that was my biggest issue, again, with this book, was just his writing and the way that he was painting the world. So for an overall rating of 3 stars, I definitely want to continue on with this series and see if it continues to get better as it goes along. The next book I picked up was a butter read with my buddies Angela from Coffee and Chapters and Felicia from Little Prairie Library, and together we read the historical fiction novel Maud by Melanie Fishbane. This is a story that is based upon the life of Ella Montgomery, so it follows her from the ages of about 12 to 17, I think. I really enjoyed it. You can definitely see where she drew inspiration for Anne from her own life. Obviously, this is a fictionalized biography of Maud, but she did base it very closely upon journals that Maud wrote, Ella Montgomery wrote, as well as letters from between herself and her relatives at the time. So you definitely got to see how she wasn't really wanted in her family. Her father didn't even really want her. She really had a hard time finding her place, not only in her own family, but also as a woman in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So it was definitely an enjoyable novel and a quick read, and one that I'm very glad that I picked up. So I ended up rating this book 4 out of 5 stars. I get the writing for 3.5, 4 stars. It wasn't the best writing I've ever read, but it definitely was also really easy to read, so there was that. I gave the story itself 4.5 out of 5 stars. I gave the setting descriptions, obviously not world building since this takes place in our own world of Canada. So I gave the setting descriptions 5 stars. She really painted a very vivid picture of late 19th century Canada, which I quite enjoyed. And I gave the characters 4 out of 5 stars. She did a really good job at portraying the characters, not only of Maud, but the people in her life as well. For an overall rating of 4 stars, I really enjoyed this book. It was definitely a kind of an interesting glimpse into Ella Montgomery's life, and one that I'm glad to have read. The next book that I read in July was Furyborn by Claire Legrand. I did receive this from the publisher in exchange for my free and honest review, which I have already filmed and is up, and I will leave that link down below if you guys would like to check it out to get a more in-depth look at all of my feelings for this book. Overall, I actually really enjoyed this one a lot more than I thought I would, and I think that kind of helped going into it with somewhat low expectations because it ended up, you know, being pleasantly surprised by it. But the basic premise of this is that it follows 2 young women 1,000 years apart. One is prophesied to be the Blood Queen, one is prophesied to be the Sun Queen. You don't quite know for a bit of the book who is who. You do kind of have a better idea by the end of the book, but she did really, really well. I really like the fact that she had them 1,000 years apart. Every chapter followed one queen, and then the next chapter was switched to the other one. One chapter would follow Raelle, the next chapter would be 1,000 years later with Eliana, and I never really felt kind of discombobulated switching between the two. It flowed really, really nicely. Like some of the events and the climactic scenes that were built up in one chapter would kind of flow into the events that were going to happen in the next chapter, even though they were completely different characters. So I really enjoyed this world. It's full of like these angels, these like angels that are more like demons almost, and this world is basically upon the brink of collapse, and there's all this power, and it was just a really, really kind of fun and original novel that I found myself really enjoying. So I ended up rating this book 4 out of 5 stars. I gave the plot 4.5 out of 5 stars. I gave the world building 4 out of 5 stars. It was apparently pretty decent world building. I had a pretty good grasp of what this world was like and what it looked like. I gave the characters 4.5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed the characters of Eliana and Raelle. They're both strong women in their own right, even though they were very, very different in terms of personality and background. I gave the writing 4 out of 5 stars for an overall rating of 4 out of 5 stars. Again, I really enjoyed this book. It had a lot of political intrigue that I really enjoyed. It also had quite a bit of diversity, not only a diversity of race, but also LGBTQ characters. Eliana herself is bisexual. So there is a lot going on in this book, and it was just a lot of fun. I cannot wait for the next book in the series to kind of see where things are going to go from here. And the last book that I completed in the month of August was The Lathe of Heaven by Ursula K. Le Guin. This was her science fiction novel that she published in 1971. We actually read this in my work book club, and it led to a lot of really interesting discussions, which I quite enjoyed. I really enjoyed this book. It was a really quick read. It follows this man, George Orr, who has the ability to change the fabric of reality with his dreams. So he can dream these dreams that when he wakes, whatever happened in his dream will be true. And this really distresses him, so he ends up going to this psychiatrist, Dr. Haber, who is supposed to be able to help him to stop having these dreams. So it takes place in a futuristic society. I think it's supposed to be about the 2000s, and it takes place in Portland, which I loved, of course, because I live in Oregon and I work in Portland. Ursula herself, of course, lived and worked in Portland, so she definitely had a good grasp of Portland itself. It was kind of cool seeing all of the different places that I'm familiar with and see her describe them, and it was just really interesting. I really enjoyed the book. It was definitely a kind of a book that, while short, and the science fiction plot of it, and while it was very science fiction-y, it also kind of made you think, and it really kind of delved deep into like the human psyche and the idea of power and how different people wield power differently, and I really enjoyed it. It was a quick read. It definitely got me thinking, and I really found myself enjoying it. So I ended up rating this book 4 out of 5 stars. I gave the world building 4 out of 5 stars. I mean, it takes place in Oregon. She did a good job at describing Portland. I gave the writing itself 4 out of 5 stars. I gave the plot 4 out of 5 stars. And I give the characters 4.5 out of 5 stars for an overall rating of 4 stars. I definitely recommend checking this out. I think this is a good one to start with if you're new to Ursula K. Le Guin. I haven't read much by her, so I found myself enjoying it, not having been a big Ursula Le Guin reader. So yeah, I enjoyed this one, and I'm glad I picked it up. The next book that I read in July was Empire of Sand by Tasha Suri. This is a book that is not coming out until November of this year. I did receive an ARC from Orbit in exchange for my free and honest review. I'm going to go more in depth in a review video closer to the time of release. So I'm going to kind of keep my description of this book a little bit concise since it's not yet out. But it takes place in a Middle Eastern Indian inspired world. It follows a character of Mare, who is descended from the Amarithi, who are a group of indigenous people who have the ability to use dance to kind of influence the dreams of the gods. The gods are slumbering, but their dreams cause these majestic and magical sandstorms, and the Amarithi have the power to kind of shape the events and the fortunes of this world through dance. So there is a group of mystics that are controlled by the emperor, and they basically harness these dreams for ill, but they need an Amarithi to do so. So they end up coercing her into a marriage that she wants no part of in order to kind of harness her powers. So she has to kind of figure out how to break out of that and where she kind of falls in this world. So I actually ended up enjoying this book fairly well. I rated it 3.5 out of 5 stars. The story and the concept was amazing. I loved it. I rated the plot of this book like 4.5 out of 5 stars. It was the writing that I had a hard time with. It was, again, kind of felt a little bit flat to me, and the pacing was terrible for a good chunk of this book. Like, it took me a while to read just because it was moving really, really slow. I feel like it could have been maybe 50 to 100 pages shorter than it was. I gave the characters 4 out of 5 stars, and I gave the world building 4 out of 5 stars. I do feel like there could have been more world building and history for this world than we received in this book. So I ended up reading this book 3.5 out of 5 stars overall. I definitely look forward to the future books in this series, and I can definitely see how this author, while this is her debut novel, is definitely going to have a very strong career in the future. The next book that I started was one of the ones that I DNF'd, and that was City of Lies by Sam Hawke. I really tried to like this book. I got 52% of the way in, and then I just had to DNF it. Part of my problems with this book was that it was exceedingly slow. The pacing was absolutely terrible. I got over halfway through this book and almost nothing had happened. Nothing was resolved. It's definitely a weird book because it's a mix between fantasy and a mystery book. I'm not the biggest mystery reader. I don't mind mysteries, but I really had a hard time with this book. It was so boring. So boring, guys. And I was really trying to finish it, but I couldn't do it anymore, and I just had to put it off to the side. It follows 2 main characters, a brother and a sister. The sister actually deals with a chronic illness, so she definitely has to work through that a lot, and she describes that quite well. And then the brother has OCD and anxiety, and together they're kind of trying to protect this kingdom and this city under time of siege. The problem that I had with these 2 characters is that you could not tell who was who in the chapters. Like, she would alternate their character perspectives. So one chapter was a brother, one chapter was a sister, but if I put the book down and then picked it up, I couldn't remember whose perspective I was reading because they read exactly the same. And I hate it when that happens. Like, if you're gonna do multiple character perspectives in a book, I feel like you really need to work to make them feel very independent and make these characters really grow and feel like separate people. But I didn't have that in this book. Like, they felt like the same character, and I got really frustrated. So between the pacing and some of the writing issues I had, I ended up DNFing it because life was too short and I do not have time to read books that I'm not super invested in. So sadly, I DNF'd it. Didn't rate it because I didn't finish it, but it's just not for me. I know a lot of people are really enjoying this book. For me, it was definitely a pass. And the last book that I finished in July, and the last book that I've read, and the last book is one that I started in July but did not finish, though I am almost done with it now, and that is The Poppy War by RF Kuang. This is an Asian-inspired fantasy, and I am loving it so much. So good. So this is set in a world that has been devastated by several poppy wars, and as a result of this, there are quite a few war orphans, and anybody who had less than 2 children was forced to take in these war orphans. So she's taken in by a couple of opium traffickers. Drugs in this world, of course, are extremely illegal, so of course this is, you know, kind of a risky thing to do. These people are terrible. She wants to find a way out of their house, and she does so by taking this test that will ensure that she can get into a very prestigious academy, and she does. And then the story kind of takes off from there. She tries to find her place in this world and in this academy and all of that good stuff. So I'm really enjoying it so much. I don't want to go too much into my feelings since I'm not done with it, and some of those feelings might change, but suffice it to say, I'm loving it. It's a grimdark fantasy, so if you're new to grimdark, be aware that it is very dark. I'm used to grimdark fantasy. I have read many grimdark fantasy books, so I'm used to it, but if this is a book that you are intrigued by, just be aware that there is a lot of brutality, because that is kind of a signature of grimdark fantasy. But yeah, I should be finishing it this weekend. I only have like 120 pages left, and I can't wait to see what's going to happen. Alright guys, that is it for my July wrap-up. I hope you guys enjoyed seeing some of the books that I read and all of my thoughts on them. If you have anything to add to this video, please feel free to do it down in the comments because I would love to know what you have to say. Thank you guys so much for watching. Have a wonderful day. Until next time, happy reading. Bye!